So we're so happy to have so many of you who have joined us for today's webinar on supporting your student through academic planning and course registration. My name is Penny Wyatt, and I am the Director of Family Programs and External Relations for the Division of Student Affairs at Tulane. And I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming my colleagues from our college advising department to talk to you tonight. So Heather Cooper and Patrick Long will be presenting the content this evening, and they'll present their content, and then we'll save some time for questions and answers. And if we don't get to all of those, we will look at those that could be answered singly with a follow-up message to you, or we'll really look for themes and similarities among questions and try to add a little bit of content to the end of the slides before we post them in the archive. So that way that additional content can be available for everybody. So I think now I'll turn things over, and I believe that Heather's going first. Oh, hold on
That's
just a second.
correct.
So here we are. So again, this is about supporting your student through academic planning and course registration.
Yes, thank you, Penny. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm excited to be here. Tonight is the primary purpose of tonight's webinar is as is written. It is really just to support you in giving you some of the framework that you need to support your student. Your student is in the driver's seat, but maybe like when they learned how to drive, it's maybe for the first time and they need a little bit of extra support. And you, of course, are an adult who probably has had a little bit more time with complex processes and decision making. So we're here just to give you some insider look at how all of this works from our perspective and the work that our team has been doing over the year to prepare for your students to arrive to Tulane and get registered smoothly and with lots of support. On the next slide, we will just quickly introduce ourselves. So if you could advance those. My name is Heather Cooper. I am the Director of College Advising. I use she, her pronouns. I've been at Tulane for 13 years this coming summer. I always love to share my email because I don't love the families feeling like they need to kind of rumble around in the dark to find information. I feel like one of the things that we do in our office really well are kind of we're the ambassadors of information and navigation at Tulane. So that's a really important role to me, and I'm really excited to be here tonight to talk about registration. Patrick, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick Long. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm an assistant director within college advising, and specifically, I'm over the first year advising process. And I've been at Tulane this summer. For me, will be 5 years.
Thanks, Patrick. Next slide, please. So the objectives of tonight's talk are to share with you some of the ways in which advising at Tulane generally works, not just within our office, but outside of it. What the core curriculum or general ed requirements are at Tulane and what the required things are that your student is probably thinking about now in the current moment. What a typical first semester schedule should look like, may look like, and is the right fit for your student. So we'll be talking a little bit about what to watch for as you support and help your student. How the registration process itself works. It is a well-coordinated effort and something that we've taken lots of time to plan and think about over the last year. And every summer we do this work. What registration looks like kind of now and during the appointments that your students will meet with our team. So summer appointments will get covered, what those actual appointments look like, what things students should be doing prior to those appointments, and how to best prepare for those appointments. And then, of course, what will happen during the appointment and what the expectations are for the end of that meeting. How to generally support your students will be some tips and tricks that Patrick and I can share through our years of work with families and parents and students in this work, and kind of what things you might want to be thinking about doing and what things you should be letting your student actually do. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the resources available. We have so much information. There are tons of resources, but tonight's focus really is just first semester summer registration and the resources that will get you and your family through the summer into the fall. And then we can kind of have a part two as we think about registration for spring, for example, which often I'll meet with families at that time as well. So tonight's objective is focusing on summer. Thanks, Penny. We can advance. Patrick?
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the advising model at Tulane. So college advising is an academic advising office. We have advisors that work with students from start all the way until graduation. The way we divide up students is that all students entering into their first year will work with a first year advisor, a member of my team that is a little bit more focused and more specialized around their transition into college life. We cut across all curriculum types, but the main idea we have is that all students are pretty exploratory. They're navigating a lot of complex changes, different goal setting. So they'll have a first year advisor throughout the whole process as they transition into academic life here at Tulane. And then throughout their college experience, they're going to have additional advising support, but they'll always keep a college advisor. So once they go beyond the first year team into sophomore year, they'll work with someone on our more content-based upper level teams. So it'll be divided more loosely based on their types of majors. And then as they do things like declare their major or seek out other room for academic enrichment, they're going to get more advising specialists kind of added into the mix. So unlike most schools where you're kind of trading out advisors as you do things like declaring a major, we have a really, I would say, tiered approach to advising. So we're always kind of just adding more specialists to their team. So there are a lot of people that they're going to be engaging with. We all bring different perspectives. We all have different responsibilities for students' record. So college advising, our focus is really on, as primary advisors, your students' overall academic experience. We're tracking their progress towards graduation and really serving as a main starting point for a lot of academic discussions. A lot of what we do is referring to other offices. Our advisors are not always the people who have the authority or the exact information, but we're centrally located in the way that we can really help you get the process started. So I like to say that our advisors are here not to tell students what to do, but to really kind of facilitate their own information gathering and problem solving so they can feel confident in their own decision making. Once you declare, you'll get assigned a major advisor in your department. Some departments use professional advisors, some departments use faculty. Other types of advisors you might engage with on campus are things like pre-professional advisors. So if your students are thinking about being pre-med or pre-law, if your students are considering national and internationally competitive fellowships and scholarships, we have a fellowship advising office. We also have study abroad advisors, and then career and success coaches are other advising allied offices. So it's going to feel like there are a lot of people, but we divide it up into these more specialist roles for a reason. All of us kind of intermingle and overlap with each other to make sure your student has a really well-supported academic experience.
And I'll
Penny, I
just
think, yeah. Oh,
no,
go
I'll
ahead.
just reiterate that the first year advising team is usually where most of our first year students are going to come, figure out where to start, and then they'll often start getting ready to go talk to those other offices. So if they get really overloaded, they can start with our office. And our whole team will kind of support them through those kinds of questions and navigation. So Penny reminded us that you all are the families and the parents supporting the students. So I don't tell you about core curriculum and major exploration because I expect you to be noting what the core curriculum is or the major for exploration. But it is helpful as one of those big frames that I mentioned earlier for you to kind of have an understanding of the general buckets that our requirements fall into and how things that your student may have already done in high school, what they bring to the table and how those things might count or not count in certain ways. Our curriculum is really unique, I would say, in some ways, in most ways, because it spans all of the different schools. And so we're a centralized advising office in Newcomb Tulane College, which is the undergraduate arm of the university. And all of the schools, School of Public Health, Architecture, Science and Engineering, Business, all of those schools came together to create this core curriculum. So that's the exciting part. The difficult part is that it kind of spans all of the schools. And so our office tries to kind of bring it all together and say, look, everyone's got to do a little bit of something in order to be what Tulane students are, which are global citizens, well-rounded citizens, and students who are fully adulted and kind of ready for the next leap after college. So the core curriculum is merely a list of classes, but it is a list with a lot of options of classes. So we have three main areas of learning: proficiency requirements. Proficiency just means the things that we have to get to a certain level before they're going to give a Tulane degree. So things like writing and language. Distribution requirements. This is a requirement, a set of requirements that make sure that you kind of, every student has a little bit of coursework within almost all of the schools. This is why most students will take a lab science, even if they're an English major. No, not everybody needs to take math, but the math and sciences area or formal reasoning area will be something that is required within this set of curriculum lists. And then we have our Tulane specific requirements or so-called additional requirements. These are the requirements that just kind of tag on to our other classes and allow for students to get involved in things like service learning or understand the world from a more global perspective. AP, the top questions we get right now from families and students are about how credits from high school work. So Tulane does take AP, IB, and A-level credits towards things like proficiency requirements, but they don't use them towards distribution requirements. That is primarily because Tulane faculty really felt it important to make sure that students are taking college level classes at college when they're getting that kind of well-rounded college experience. Now, if somebody takes a class in the summer and brings it in to Tulane and it's another college class to another this college class, there are things that we can discuss in our meetings. Proficiency and distribution requirements don't overlap. So just because you took a writing class that is English doesn't necessarily mean you covered a textual and historical requirement. So it's just important to just know those general things and general things that cause some confusion for our students. Core curriculum is super flexible. So if I need to take a writing class and I already have AP credit for English 1010, I have a list of like 3 or 4 pages of options from philosophy to English to history classes that might fulfill my writing requirement. And so there's a lot of good opportunities here for students who don't need math for a particular major requirement. They might be able to take something like a data class to understand reasoning and be able to kind of fulfill what is called formal reasoning requirement, which traditionally would have been covered by a math class, for example. So,
Heather, oh, sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
no,
I
go
was just
ahead.
going to add in something real quick.
Yeah, sure.
A common point of confusion with AP and IB is the tier one writing requirement. So just keep in mind, if a student has AP or IB English credit, they'll take a separate option for tier one writing. However, unless you have AP or IB English credit, English 1010 is a class you'll take for your tier one writing. It's a really common point of confusion. So just keep in mind, most students are going to take that how to write class, unless it's something they covered in AP and IB credits.
Yeah, thank you for that. Core curriculum is flexible. It often overlaps with the major and minors, so there's no restrictions on how it overlaps with their major specifically. But if your student is exploring a lot of majors, we often like to say use the core to explore, because just taking the classes that are required, what we call required or meeting the core curriculum requirements, are usually enough to give a student a little bit of selection in their first semester to both check boxes, but also hopefully get into things that they're really interested in and find out what they really like and gravitate to and what they don't like and are gravitating away from. All right, thanks, Penny. Next slide.
All right, so just a little touch point on the language requirement, because sometimes this can be kind of confusing. So all students need to gain proficiency in a foreign language to the 2030 level or higher. So basically, if a student starts from scratch, it's a 3-class sequence. So if a student decided coming from high school that they really wanted to take Japanese, it would be a 3-class sequence. So you take 1010, 1020, and 2030, and then you'd be complete with a minimum requirement that NTC requires. If a student has taken a significant amount of a foreign language in high school and would like to just continue with that language, they can complete a language placement. But keep in mind, the placement places you into a class within that sequence. It's not necessarily placing you out of it altogether. So if you've taken a few levels of a language in high school, you can take the placement to see if you can maybe skip a class towards that 2030 goal. If a student has very extensive background in a foreign language, for example, they took AP French, but maybe they just got a 3 on the exam because they were nervous. There are opportunities in some cases for students to sit for credit exams, but placement's always the starting point. So I tell students, if you think you place really highly, go ahead and take that placement. If you place at a certain level, the language departments will indicate that testing by exam might be an option. So basically, at a minimum, 3 semesters of language at Tulane. And I always encourage students to consider that your high school might have pretty limited options when it came to foreign language. And the foreign language requirement is an opportunity to kind of really expand your horizons. We offer, I think, 13 or 14 different languages at Tulane, many of which are not commonly offered in high school. So I always tell students, yes, you can take placement to kind of take less courses towards a requirement, but also consider how many doors something off the beaten path might open. When else are you gonna have an opportunity to take Italian or Haitian Creole or Vietnamese? That one's upcoming, not current. But keep in mind, the language requirement is a great opportunity to explore and expand your horizons a bit. There are some exceptions. So for students within engineering specifically, the engineering major, because of how large it is, does not require foreign language. It's automatically waived. That's not just a Tulane standard, that's kind of a standard across engineering programs within the US. And then if your student completed high school in a different language other than English. So if a student's primary language of instruction and at the high school level was not in English, they may be able to get exempt from the foreign language requirement because the assumption is that they already speak a second language.
So, what should a typical first semester schedule look like? Generally, the requirement for graduation is at minimum 120 credits. So just from a credit perspective, and if your student is planning to be here for actually 8 semesters over 4 years, most students need about 15 credits per semester to complete that 120 credit requirement at minimum. So we usually recommend that students always begin their semesters with anywhere from 15 to 17 credits. Most of our lecture courses are 3-credit courses. Some lectures have labs, so you might have a 4-credit course. So some students in a lot of science-driven things might find themselves in 4 courses. Some students who are a little bit more squarely liberal arts might find themselves in around 5 classes. There are other exceptions to that within architecture and other schools. But for the most part, students will be in around 4 or 5 classes each semester, taking 15 to 17 credits at the very maximum. We want to make sure students look at their schedule and see, yes, there are things I need here, but there are also things I'm excited about. So balance across the interests and skills and class size are all really important. You might have a pre-med student at your house who will be definitely in a large chemistry class or biology class in their first semester. So that might be, to Patrick's point about language, a nice way to think, maybe one of my 3rd or 4th classes will be, I'll take Greek or some other language so I can balance out my heavier science class with this smaller kind of class environment. Every student will take something called a first-year seminar or TIDE class. Those classes are just 1 credit, once a week courses that every incoming student is required to take in some form. So those are always going to be small, but we just like to have a mixture of like small and big classes for the requirements, and then the things that may be more discussion based. It's nice to have a little bit of that variety. I have had students who come in, they're like, I just want to do science and math all the time. I understand that, and that could be your semester, but at the end of the day, the students will need to find that variety at some point, and I like to find that balance throughout every semester rather than trying to rip the band-aid off and make the first semester, all your really hard classes that you just want to get over with, and then you find out that college was really hard. So doing my hardest classes first wasn't always the best choice and those kind of things. So we want that balance and we want students kind of cognizant of that balance. Um, and we want to make sure that they have the prerequisites and co-requisites that they need for each course so that we're going to show them like how to do the things and how to match the things and how to read the schedule so they can see where the co-requisites and prerequisites are listed. All of that stuff is part of the first semester schedule, but it's almost impossible for your student to register for classes that aren't fulfilling some sort of requirement, whether it be something specific for the major or something specific for our core curriculum. It's the first semester, everything they take will be useful. I think it's really useful and helpful. We've been asking students kind of what their major direction is. It's fine if students are feeling very exploratory or very unsure. I want them to try out, get their foot in an economics class if they're interested in business, but maybe also take that political science class so that you have your foot in both directions and you can move that forward in the second semester when you've said, you know what, economics is not for me. I just lost my Zoom screen. So those are the sorry about that. Okay. So anyway, a typical first semester will have these elements to it. We will help them to look for things like, hey, maybe 10 classes back to back isn't a great idea, or don't you need to eat lunch at some time? We won't be able to catch all of it. And the students certainly have the autonomy to change their schedules, but those are the types of things that we'll talk about in our meetings.
So I'm going to give an overview of registration as a process. The summer registration process for incoming students is very unique. It's one of the only times we have students register in this way. Up to this point, students should have started working on the May orientation modules from college programs and first year experience. In the May orientation module is an advising section. In that section, it gives an overview of a lot of the stuff we've discussed today, things they need to know about our office, curriculum resources, scheduling information. It also goes over how to sign up for that summer meeting. At this point, they should have completed the major interest form from the registrar. So if in May when you deposited, if your major interests that you applied in changed, you had an opportunity to update it. Don't worry if you didn't update it with that survey that the registrar sent out. We can update it in the meeting. Students should have, if they haven't, go ahead and do these things. Completed the registration worksheet and foreign language placement. I'll put it this way. The most important piece is the registration worksheet because it tells advising information about your student. So if your student tells us about potential pending AP credits coming in, it tells us a little bit about their interests in classes, what they're hoping to major in. The foreign language placement, while it is helpful for students to take it closer to now because it's fresh, it's not going to get in the way of our first meeting unless a student wants to take it in their first semester. So if your student is really excited about French and they feel like high school French was really what they liked and they want to continue onward, sure, prioritize the foreign language placement. But if your student thinks they're probably going to start from scratch or they're not quite sure if they want a language their first semester, biggest priority is the registration worksheet. So I've had a few students reach out to me because they're like, oh no, my meeting's tomorrow. I haven't gotten the results back from foreign language placement, and that's normally fine. So we need to take it eventually, but shouldn't be a stress point. Your students have all been pre-registered in classes that correspond to their current major interests. We say current major interests because sometimes students haven't updated the system. For example, I talked to a student today that in the system it said architecture, so they had an architecture schedule. We changed their entire schedule because they're no longer interested in architecture. Pre-registration is a starting point for students. It's based off of what typical students in that area typically complete in their first semester, if not year. It doesn't factor in things like AP or IB credits, information that your student's going to provide to us that the registrar did not have access to. It's a shell of a schedule around 12 credits. For some really structured majors like engineering, architecture, business, your student might make very minimal changes. But if you're in a less structured major, for example, something in liberal arts, you're going to have a collection of courses that count towards different requirements. Your student might change all of them. The main thing to keep in mind is the pre-registration is meant to kind of spread classes out so that students are not disadvantaged if they meet with us at the end of the month versus the beginning of the month. A lot's going to change. So keep in mind too, it's a starting point. It's not necessarily your end point. If you come to the meeting and your pre-registered courses all sound great and you're like, this is awesome, I'm ready to go, you'll add a tides class and one more class and you're good to go. But you also will have opportunities to change things. You should have also, or your students should have also received an email from our office to their Tulane account to book an appointment that are going to take place between yesterday and all the way through July 11th. So an email was sent out on June 4th, June 6th, and yesterday. So they've gotten a few touch points. Your student at this point really should make sure that they can access their Tulane email. If they haven't already started monitoring it, a lot of important information from the institution is starting to be sent there exclusively. So our office at this point stops sending anything to alternative emails. We send everything exclusively to your student's Tulane account. So make sure that your student I would encourage them to start checking it. And your students should also make sure they can log into our systems. They should have received an email from IT about setting up their Gibson portal, which is how they access things like the schedule of classes. So regardless of when your student's advising session is, they should just make sure they can log into everything and have it all set up. So back to registration overview. During these sessions, students will complete the pre-meeting steps above, check their tech access in the emails that they were sent. It gives an overview of all the things to check. Make sure you have downloaded Zoom. Make sure you've signed up through Pingy. It's a good idea to have your students encourage them to list specific course of interest, potential majors and minor areas, and then they're going to attend the meeting with our team individually. So your student will be a part of a group-based meeting organized around their major area of interest. So somewhere in the ballpark of 8 to 10 students and 2 advisors will be working with your student based off of specific areas. So like if your student signs up for a session that's for a business advising, they're going to be grouped with all other business students. Can we go to the next slide? I want to make sure I don't speak ahead. I can just continue on to this one. So for summer appointments, prior to the appointment, like I said before, they can book through Penji. We use a different software for the summer appointments just by the nature of how they're organized. They need to make sure to allot for a meeting time of about 90 minutes because between the presentation and the individual working with all the students, it could take longer depending on if your student is prepared, but also if your student has a lot of questions or concerns. It is required for students to gain access to make schedule changes that they attend a summer advising session. There is a hold on every single student account until they meet with us. We will lift the hold for a certain set amount of time during this month, and then it releases indefinitely at the end of the summer advising process in July. But if your student is checking Gibson and they see they have an advising hold, it's there for a reason. It's to prompt them to meet with us. And then prior to the meeting, they need to really focus on completing registration worksheets, language placement, if applicable, those modules, the first year modules in Canvas. And like we said before, they've been pre-registered into courses that highlight top academic interests and account for course availability and times.
So I can cover during the appointment. Would you like me to do that, Patrick?
Sure, I feel like I jumped ahead a little bit with the first
No,
slide.
it's a good. It's good. I kind of broke it up into before, during, and after because I know that as a parent, it is extremely difficult to keep track of all of the things. So your students have gotten a lot of information about preparing for the appointment. During the appointment, like Patrick mentioned, there'll be small registration groups with other students with an opportunity to meet one-on-one with one of the advisors on staff in the meeting for questions. Advising team will basically focus on teaching your student how to navigate the schedule system, guide them through their registration options, and meet individually with them one-on-one after they've shown everybody kind of the basics of moving through the schedule. The registration system will be open from the morning of their appointment, scheduled appointment, through the third day of that after that meeting. So if their meeting was on Monday, they have until Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. to kind of make all of the decisions that they can within the given week, do the best they can with that decision making and the add drop process, keeping an eye for new availability in courses and all of that. And it closes, so other students have equal opportunity kind of throughout the month. And later on July 14th, their registration will reopen and they'll have full access to the registration, adding and dropping, hopefully not all summer, that might get a little unhealthy. But adding and dropping will be available to them through August 29th, which is the last date to add. The main goal here is very simple, just to be fully registered in 15, 16 credits, make sure they have a TIDES, and make sure they're generally moving in the right direction for their given interest. And what I've told my advisors is I just want to make sure that every student feels confident when they leave the meeting to do the things that they need to do on their own. And that might include, what do I do with the wait list? What if I don't like the 6 p.m. lab? What happens if I decide not to do engineering after thinking about our conversation? We want to empower them to make those changes. We can't meet with every student over and over again all summer, but we are definitely going to be here to support them through those moments of change. And so my main goal is some confidence, some excitement about their schedule, and just to be fully registered and have the boxes checked that all first year students need. After the appointment, like I said, registration will reopen for those students who have met with us on July 14th, which is a Monday, I believe. Changes to schedules may occur all the way through the summer, but ideally they have more or less settled on what they're scheduled for and are registered in what they need, but they are not. Maybe they want to change the time. They don't really want the 8 a.m., but there's a 10 a.m. class that they're hoping to change into. Those kind of things happen a lot in the first week or two of classes. But generally knowing that these are the general classes and areas of classes that are good for me to take, that's really what we want for your students. You can progress to the next slide. Thank you.
Great. So a little bit about pre-matriculation credit. So pre-matriculation is just a fancy word for credits that your student might have completed prior to matriculating or enrolling and coming to campus. So for AP, IB, and A levels, if you just search Tulane AP, IB level chart, in our university catalog, there is a section called Credit by Exam. It gives an overview of all the AP, IB, and A level exam scores that we accept, the level you have to reach. So for AP, for example, you have to get a 4 or higher to garner credit, and it will tell your student what it comes in as. It's important that students remember they need to send all credit from all years to Tulane. So they may already know their junior year credits, but the senior year credits are still pending. So around like first week in July, usually by July 7th, the College Board is going to report out all of the AP scores. At that time, your student can send all scores from junior and senior year or beyond. Sometimes students take sophomore year to Tulane as an institution. And then it'll get posted to their record if it meets the requisite scoring requirements. If your student has dual enrollment courses or other transfer credits, so dual enrollment meaning their credits show up both on their high school transcript and a college transcript, or direct enrollment, so a student went and just took a class at a university over the summer because they were interested in it. You'll be able to access this when we send the slide, but we have a transfer credit advising website, and your student can submit their syllabi for those courses to be evaluated. Any classes that are transferring from other institutions has to be evaluated by our faculty to determine if it'll transfer. Through the transfer credit process, they'll look over and make sure that it matches our accreditation matching standards, but also it'll send it off to the different faculty. If your student has a lot of dual enrollment credits or transfer credits that may impact their first semester, it's really important for them to get this started. They're going to need a syllabus that would match what's listed on that college transcript. It can take some time. because I think of it this way, if you have five different classes from five different departments, our transcript specialist is connecting to all those individual faculty departments. Um, so better to get it started. And then keep in mind for dual enrollment specifically, so those classes that are both on a high school transcript and a college transcript, Tulane's policy is to limit to about five full courses or about 15 credits. So we have we have a maximum for dual enrollment credits. There's no maximum for AP or IB or A levels. There's no maximum credit for general transfer credits. It's just those dual enrollment classes that have that limitation. You can progress to the next slide.
So some of the ways that you can support your student, besides attending this webinar and absorbing all of these details, is to, first and foremost, just help your student to reflect on what classes they will enjoy and what they will excel in. We don't always catch, a student's fear of math. So, but they said they were interested in engineering, so they might be in chemistry, physics, and math. But if your student gets off the call and says, I can't do all this chemistry and math, maybe that's something to discuss and say, well, why don't you think about which of these items are most important for you to get started with, or ask the advisor which ones is most important to get started with, and kind of pare it down. You know that they've never had a lot of success with math classes in high school, for example. While I don't want to undermine any student who wants to do something new, we just want to make sure that we're having open conversations with that information, and we have that information so we can say, okay, if you're not ready for that, let's try this version of the schedule and let's talk to the department so that you can kind of fill in the knowledge you need to become an engineer. I have a friend who's an engineer who had to take a longer version of calculus through college and high school because that's where he was at with his education from high school. So there's no shame in any of it, but helping your student just kind of reflect in a positive way and letting them make those decisions on their own can really be useful. You know your student much better than we will get to know them in the short visits that we have with them right now. So it is a good moment to say, does it have the balance? Are you excited about some of these? And I'm sure you'll see your student either not want to talk about it because they feel fine with it, or tell you pretty openly that they have some concerns and might need to follow up, ask some questions. Encouraging your student to do the research available about majors and minors. I have had students show up and say they're interested in a major that we simply just don't have. So I want to make sure that students at this point are thinking like, okay, this major this major only has a major, not a minor. So if I want to do something like that, maybe I'll talk to my advisor about my interest in communication or journalism, for example. But like, how can I build journalism into my interests without necessarily majoring or minoring in that particular thing? So just helping them understand that there are resources, and it's called the catalog. That's how I got through college myself. It's a little printed catalog under my arm. Reminding your student to remain patient and flexible. We are registering a lot of students right now. We're having a lot of meetings and our staff is at capacity. So while we are listening and responding to as many emails as we can, sometimes it takes a few days. Sometimes that schedule is going to require an 8 a.m. class, and the 10 a.m. class is not going to become available. It's first semester. Our seniors register first. The people with the most credits and the people with the least credits register last. But your students are registering for other first-year classes. And so everybody's been kind of dropped into a set of classes that should match their interests, but their flexibility and say, you know what, I don't love that. I don't love that, but I definitely am interested in that. Or I am actually willing to try that. I've never thought about taking a drawing class, but maybe that's something I should do. It's college, right? I'm never going to have a chance to do it. So just kind of reminding them that it's okay to be unsure, but being flexible and patient is really going to go a long way. And I think that especially goes to students who are super planners and want all the information before the experience happens. And I think most of us know that by the time the experience is happening, the decision-making process becomes a lot easier. Helping them manage their expectations and encourage them to reach out to our team. And I say our team, Patrick and I offered our email at the beginning of this webinar, and individual advisors have been assigned, but individual advisors might be out of office. That's okay. That doesn't mean that anything is unavailable to them. The rest of our team is right here. And if there's something happening, let's get in contact with your students. So letting them know that no, the person that you emailed once last October might not respond right away because they're out of office, but that they are kind of ready for you, and the rest of the team can be accessed if you need to. And then long-term, just checking in about their plans. It's always helpful, I think, for families to discuss, like, what are your long-term goals? What kinds of extra things that do you want to make sure that you do? Maybe it's study abroad or summer school or doing an internship. What kind of costs are required there? Those kind of things are important conversations for, I think, families to help their student understand that this is a kind of 4-year planning process. They don't need to have it all worked out today, but eventually they're going to feel more and more in control as they see the plan coming together semester by semester. And then so I brought this slide in to make sure that it's on our resource page as well. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act really just, again, put your student in the driver's seat. College advising is very different than high school counseling. High school counseling might have also talked about scheduling things and AP classes and requirements for graduation, but they also are responsible for kind of maybe intervening and getting a student to talk to this person or that person or get tutoring. We don't require those things of students. We expect students to bring us their issues, and we will help them kind of navigate the college work around that. The other thing that happens in high school that doesn't happen in college is things like grades. Parents will not get midterm grades sent to them. They won't have progress reports or grades. I hope that your student and you are having open conversations about those things each semester, even when it's a tough semester or unexpected semester. But know that what the FERPA basically rule allows is for us to share certain information only to those named individuals that students have signed off on. So if you, for example, want to talk to financial aid about a student's aid package and you want specifics on numbers, that student will need to identify you as a person that can speak to that particular office on their behalf. So they'll need to fill out a little form. It's pretty easy to fill out, but the student does need to fill it out by hand and usually turn it in office, but they can also scan it and email it directly from their Tulane email to the appropriate office. So financial aid might be somebody who gets one of those forms if this is an important topic for you. Advising might be somebody who gets one of those forms so that if you were to call, we could speak more openly about the student's schedule or when they last came in. Otherwise, if the FERPA is not on file, that's usually fine too. I think it's great for parents to call and just say, look, I don't understand the transfer process. Can you walk me through it? Because I am in reality helping my student figure out how to take the summer class. Can you walk me through it? I can talk to you about policy and cattle and all day long. I just can't give you individual details from your student's academic record. That belongs to them now that they're 18 and at a higher education institution. So I'm just going to leave that there. There's a great website on the Tulane website, and it's on the resource page. And I think that will give you that form. But I do think, to be honest, that it is not something I can push on your student. I can't say, hey, sign this. But it is something, and it's not something I would encourage you to push on them, but it is something, it's a good way to have like an adult to adult conversation and say, look, this is how this is. And it's important to me that I know your grades or that I can call the financial aid office and get these things. So I would, like you to sign this. How do you feel about that? And having that conversation can be a really positive way to say like, hey, this is important, but what level do you as a student want me as your guardian or parent or family to support you. And so the FERPA is just a good way to do that.
Something I'll add in about FERPA is I always tell students, it gives advisors or other offices the ability to be more specific if they're called or queried, but all information really should and will still funnel through the student. So I always tell students, like, if you have people on your team, so to speak, and family that really want to be involved and helpful, that's great. But if a parent reaches out to me, I'm always copying and forwarding along to the student. Even if there's a FERPA on file, the student should always be in the driver's seat. And then keep in mind too, when it comes to our technology systems like Gibson, FERPA does not generate like a parent portal access. So FERPA may allow us to answer questions specific to your student's record, but a student's online portal is fully their own, and IT doesn't really want students to be sharing their passwords. So keep that in mind. Sometimes parents will ask, "Oh, I have a FERPA on file. How do I get access to Gibson?" The answer is they don't give out access to Gibson. It's individual to the person. All right, I think we can go to the next slide. So some resources that have been provided to your students but are great to kind of keep in mind. The academic calendars. So every single semester, following the same pattern, your student's going to be held to certain academic deadlines related to scheduling. So every semester, there's a last day to add a class, and there are 2 drop deadlines. So classes start Monday, August 18th, I think. Yep. And then the first 2 weeks is the add period. So the last day to add a class is Friday, August 29th. I almost have it committed to memory. So within the first 2 weeks, students can both add and drop classes. I always tell students aim to make major changes in week 1, because once we get to week 2, some professors really start rolling. They can treat week 1 as a trial run. Just because they built a schedule with advising, just because they talked to the professor, they're not beholden to that schedule. If they go to the first day of classes and it doesn't feel right, they should try and make changes if they can. There may come a semester where a student can't really make adjustments, like maybe that's the only section that's offered, or maybe that's the only thing that works with their schedule. Advising can talk to them about how to make the most using resources of that class. Encourage your student to seek us out during the first week. They're going to hear from us during orientation, but in the first week, we offer drop-ins Monday through Friday from 1 to 4 at multiple locations on campus. So we're really available for students who are making those kind of last-minute adjustments to their schedule. Other resources that students have access to that they're commonly going to use related to advising: the class schedule. This online tool is where they're going to register for their courses every semester. The catalog, as Heather mentioned before, is where all academic information is housed. It's updated annually by the registrar in correspondence to all the different schools. So academic policies, course offerings, major options, anything you can think of academically should be found in the catalog. I always tell students, if they're wanting to look something up, if they just Google like Tulane catalog marketing major, the catalog entry is going to be the first hit that comes up. And then our website has a lot of helpful resources, advising.tulane.edu. Once we get through the summer, that's where they're going to find how to book with their assigned first-year advisor. That booking link will go live again in mid-July. And then also currently we have an incoming website. So if you search incoming student advising, it has a lot of really commonly asked questions and resources. Towards the bottom of that page, it has things like sample schedules, majors and minors. It has a couple other things, I'm just not thinking of them. And so the advising page also has a banner right now in yellow that will direct them to the incoming student page. And then for FERPA records and more information about FERPA, it's on the conduct website. So it's conduct.tulane.edu. If you just search conduct Tulane FERPA, it's one of the first and only things that pops up.
Okay, I think it's time, Penny, for
Yeah, so
You
now
wanna
it's time for
drive?
questions. So I'll go through these and pitch these questions to Patrick and Heather, and we'll see how many we can get through in the time that we've got right now. So one of them was, where do students see the full course catalog? So that website was given. Again, I'll just remind everybody in case you anybody here joined kind of late after I'd made this announcement. The A PDF of the slides and the recording, the video of the whole webinar will be archived on the Family Programs website. So the full course catalog that that has the course descriptions, not just the name and the professor and the time and the date, that it's offered, but it'll have the description of the course is in the course catalog. Here's a question for you. What score does a student need with IB or AP to count as credit in the proficiency category? I think that was on the chart that you showed.
Yeah, so it depends on the exact score. AP and IB have different scoring systems, but if you just search like AP, IB, Tulane, under the catalog, there's a credit by exam section, and it has a whole chart that gives a breakdown of the score requirements as well as what it comes in as. So, and I think someone else asked a question about AP. Keep in mind that we accept AP and IB credit based on the presence of the exam score. So, if your student took the AP class but did not sit for the exam, we can't award credit. We can only reward credit based on that exam completion.
Okay, so here's a question that I think you've answered, but I know it might still confuse some people. Do the classes fill up quickly if my student doesn't meet with their advisor until July? So could you explain how the open seats are distributed throughout the advising period?
The nature of pre-registration as a process kind of gets ahead of that. So back in the day before we did pre-registration, it really mattered for students if they were, in the first week of our process. But essentially all students the first week in June were evenly distributed among classes, or I guess I should say all classes were evenly distributed among students. And so day to day, students are coming in and making changes. So I mentioned before that I had a student that had a bunch of architecture classes that were probably full at the time that we met, but we opened up seats by dropping those classes. So I always tell students there's very little that you risk losing by going later in the process. In many ways, I tell students avoid day one and avoid the last day if you're trying to avoid something. But either way, there will be classes. Your student has a starting point, and there is so much time between now and the end of the ad period for things to change. So day to day, as students are coming to their registration sessions, they're gonna look at their schedule and think, "Oh, I have AP credit for econ. I don't need this class." They're gonna a seat's gonna open up. They're going to move things around. They're going to reshuffle. So there's changes every single day with each session we do, and we're doing a lot of concurrent sessions. So we're seeing a lot of students every single day. So there's going to keep being shuffling. As students get AP and IB scores in July, there's going to be another round of changes. As students gain access and think over it more, things are going to keep moving around. And then there's always a ton of turnover in the first week of the semester. For whatever reason, I find students tend to hold off on final decisions until they go to the classes. I mean, I had a student fight to have a class for weeks. She spent weeks trying to get into a class, and then she dropped it because she just thought the professor's voice was annoying. There's so much room for change. So I wouldn't be worried about booking a meeting at the end of the process because of pre-registration. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
So here's a question. When does the summer appointment take place for spring scholars? I'm not sure.
So yeah, I mean, we basically start reaching out to our spring scholars to register for their spring semester, usually by October 1 or sometime mid-October at the latest. So they should, I know some of them are doing other experiences outside of Tulane and are kind of focused on just that launch. So I would just have them start checking their email, or encourage them to check their email or look for registration information. From us, specifically in October, the cohort coordinator, Destiny, who oversees a lot of our spring scholars and has already been in communication with them, will usually start priming them for those registration conversations even prior to our outreach and our link for the appointments. So it'll happen sometime mid-fall before registration for continuing students.
So this
And
is a
then
little,
spring scholars should be working with Destiny around the fall semester, whether they're doing a Tulane related study abroad or some other domestic experience. Destiny has a newsletter that goes out. I think that one went out today. So all incoming spring scholars are getting a lot of information from her specifically. Sorry, Penny, I didn't mean to cut you off.
that's okay. So another question was, what is PENG?
Penji is the scheduling operation that we are using. Actually, it's also used by our academic learning and tutoring center. It is essentially, they can download it as an app or they can access it on their browser on their computers. but they essentially just use that to find an appointment. I did see that another question regarding kind of meeting with advising looked full. We have appointments all the way through mid-July, and I've been checking pretty regularly. There are still quite a few appointments left in, I think, pretty much the last 3 weeks or 2 weeks of our process. So the 5-week process is the first couple of weeks are filling up a little bit, but the last 3 weeks are still pretty open as well. So the only time people would need to check back is if they're only available for a very short window for an appointment and that those particular sessions are full. Checking back in Penji, you can look at the appointments and sometimes people will cancel or change their appointment or a million other things. So sometimes appointments do open up at the last minute, and that's not the usual, but it is something if people are pressed for time.
So here's one. Just to confirm their understanding, they understand they'll be pre-registered for some courses and then they can add a TIDES course. And I do just want to explain that's an acronym. It's Tulane Interdisciplinary Experiences Seminar. So they add that. That's a 1 credit course. Can you explain how to navigate the catalog? How do they tell which courses would be appropriate for a first-year student? So are they looking for courses with particular numbers, or do they have other identifiers in the course catalog?
So just to distinguish, the catalog is kind of the list of all the things in every class that might ever be offered at Tulane. And then the class schedule is our registration system where students will actively add and drop things. The part of our appointments will focus on teaching students how to search the class schedule, how to look up the options, and even how to look up the options with a filter of open so they can see the open and available classes on that particular day within the category. So if they know they want to take a TIDE class, well, they know they need to take a TIDE class, we'll show them how to search all of the TIDE classes on the schedule of classes that are available during the appointment time that we are having with your student.
So Heather, would you say that students would use the class schedule to find something that's available, but if the title doesn't tell them everything they want to know, then they'd look it up in the course catalog to just find out more description of the course and what it covers?
The description of the course is actually included in the class schedule
Oh,
as
right. There's a
well.
link to it, right?
The
They can
class
click on it.
schedule, what's helpful about the class schedule is it's only going to show the students what's available in that particular
That particular
semester.
semester.
And when you're in a catalog, you're looking at every one of the 50 classes that our public health majors might take, but it doesn't help to choose a bunch of classes for the fall from that 50 class list because you don't know what actually is being offered in the fall.
Right.
So you want to look at the fall classes and select from the fall classes so that you're obviously using the relevant options on the table.
Right. So this is a really good question. Our student is thinking of studying abroad. Do they need to complete their foreign language requirement before they can do that?
It depends. So I'd say if they're thinking about studying abroad within a country that speaks that language that they're targeting, it would make a lot of sense to go ahead and complete it. Also, the longer you put it off, if it can take up to 3 semesters if a student's starting from the beginning. So I would say it's a good idea to try and take it freshman or sophomore year, just because that's when a lot of students are taking it. So your student would have the opportunity to take it with other learners that are kind of going through the process together, but it's not required prior to study abroad. Even if a student went to a country, let's say they were planning to take Spanish and they wanted to study abroad in Spain, majority of those programs are taught primarily in English, unless they wanted to take classes in that foreign language. The taking language prior is helpful, but not necessarily a requirement of study abroad.
Okay, so we're at time now at 7. I'm seeing a lot of questions, and I'm wondering whether there are students who joined the webinar or if parents are asking questions that the students will have an opportunity to ask in their advising session. So I think that the thing to remember is that if your student wants to kind of brainstorm with you sort of the list of questions that they have, then that's a way that parents can be supportive at this point and just help students get organized to make the most of their advising session and ask all of their questions. So again, we'll try really hard to get this, get the link to the recording of this and the link to the slides out to everybody who registered for this, hopefully by tomorrow afternoon. So I want to just thank Patrick and Heather for your time and preparing everything, um, and just hope that everybody has a really good advising season. And just to remember, I'll just reiterate that it's just really good to encourage patience and persistence, and to not get stressed out over this, because they will have some opportunity to refine their schedule if it doesn't feel like it's just perfect in this first go round. Do you, Heather and Patrick, do you have any final comments you want to make before we close?
Yeah, just some things I'll say for the kind of the timeline they're working with. So they'll work with someone in that session in either the morning or the afternoon. They're also going to have access. We have leadership run drop-ins from 3 to 5 Monday through Friday. So if your student goes to a session and they have a laundry list of questions, they're not sure, they got stuck, they can stop by and talk to one of our leadership team members. And then also, once the summer process is done, they're going to get outreach from their assigned first year advisors. So they're going to have a lot of like touch points. Um, Again, our systems are not overly complex necessarily. It's just all so new. So there's a lot of questions that are bound to come up. So I always tell students and families, like, if your student comes to a session and suddenly they have a million questions later, there are other opportunities to connect. It's not like a one-time thing where you have to get everything answered in this one meeting. It's kind of an ongoing process.
Heather, anything you want to add?
No, I'm just really grateful for all of the questions. I wish I could sit here and answer all of your questions all night. I really do enjoy the engagement and the questions that are coming in. A lot of them are very specific to your students. So I do think that their students can bring those questions to their advising appointments and get the answers. But again, my leadership team, Patrick is an amazing leader of the first year advising team of 6 advisors who are all assigned to the first year incoming students. And myself as director, and I have associate directors who work with us. We are here and we're happy to walk you through some of the processes. But one of the things Patrick and I have said a lot lately is just trust the process. Let your student go through it. And then if they still are feeling lost, overwhelmed, those kind of things, let's get to that. Let's get to the meat of that conversation. I'm really excited to work with your students. Our team's really excited to work with your students. And I know your students are really excited to get here in the fall. So we'll get to this hurdle, and then we'll be ready for all the new changes and new things that are happening this fall. So thank you, Penny, for giving us the opportunity to come tonight.
Thanks. Well, I hope everybody has a good evening, and I wish you the best in that. Your students a good positive experience, and know that they've got all of this support to help them through this. And it'll get easier each time they do it. Yeah.
For you as well. It'll get easier each time you support your
Right.
student through registration.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.